Here are Grandma's 25 clever poor man hacks that actually work. Homemade draft stoppers. One of the most ingenious poor man tricks for staying warm is stopping drafts without buying anything. Grandma would find ingenious items found in the house and turn simple items into draft blockers when money was tight. Rolled towels, worn sweaters, old socks filled with rags, or even newspapers wrapped in cloth were pushed tightly along door bottoms. These homemade stoppers worked immediately, keeping cold air from crawling across the floor. The beauty of this hack is its flexibility. You can move stoppers from room to room, depending on where the family gathers at night. In lean households, burning extra fuel was not an option, so blocking airflow mattered more than turning up heat. Even windowsills and stair gaps could be sealed this way. The materials cost nothing, required no tools, and could be reused year after year. It was not about comfort alone, but about being resourceful enough to make scarce heat last longer through cold seasons. Salt preservation of meat and vegetables. Did you know that salt preservation was a lifeline for poor families during depressions, wars, and hard winters long before refrigeration was common? Salt works by pulling moisture from food, stopping bacteria from growing. Meat was packed in heavy layers of salt, while vegetables were stored in strong brines inside crocks or jars. This allowed families with little money to save harvests instead of watching them rot. Salt was cheap, widely available, and easy to store, making it ideal for low-income households. Preserved foods could last months and were soaked or rinsed before cooking to reduce saltiness. This method turned surplus into security and reduced trips to the market. For resourceful families, salt preservation was not old-fashioned. It was practical insurance. When refrigerators failed or groceries were out of reach, salted food meant steady meals instead of hunger. Reusing aluminum foil. In a poor man household, aluminum foil was never treated as disposable. Clean foil was washed, dried, flattened, and reused until it truly wore out. Resourceful families reused foil to wrap leftovers, cover bowls, line pans, and shield food from heat or cold. It doubled as a reflector behind radiators or stoves, pushing warmth back into the room. Foil was shaped into funnels, used to sharpen scissors, and protected surfaces during messy repairs. When supplies were limited, foil became a multi-purpose tool rather than trash. Keeping a drawer for reused foil saved money and reduced waste without sacrificing function. Even torn pieces found new uses for insulation or scrubbing. This habit came from necessity, not laziness. Stretching small items mattered when every purchase counted. Reusing foil is a quiet example of how poor but clever households squeeze maximum value from everyday materials. Vinegar as all-purpose cleaner. Vinegar earned its place as a household staple because it replaced many costly cleaners with one cheap bottle. It cuts grease, removes mineral buildup, and cleans glass when diluted properly. According to Grandma in the middle of lean years, vinegar handled the cleaning jobs that mattered most. Floors, sinks, windows, laundry odors, and tools were all cleaned with simple vinegar solutions. Poor households relied on it because buying multiple cleaners was wasteful and unnecessary. Vinegar stored well, rarely spoiled, and was easy to dilute for different tasks. It also helped control mold and odors when ventilation was poor. While not suitable for every surface, it covered most daily needs. This hack was never about cutting corners. It was about choosing something reliable, affordable, and versatile enough to keep a home clean without draining money better spent on food or heating. Growing herbs on windowsills. For poor but resourceful households, windowsills were never wasted space. Growing herbs indoors provided flavor and nutrition without grocery costs. Small pots of basil, parsley, thyme, or chives thrived in sunny windows with minimal soil and water. These herbs turned plain meals into something satisfying when spices were unaffordable. Harvesting only what was needed reduced waste and stretched meals further. Even apartments and crowded homes could support this setup. Windowsills became productive space instead of decoration. Herbs also lifted morale during hard times by adding freshness to simple food. This practice required patience, not money. Seeds were cheap, cuttings were shared, and pots were reused containers. For families watching every dollar, growing herbs was a quiet act of independence. It proved that ingenuity could turn the smallest spaces into steady sources of value, flavor, and everyday improvement. Vinegar as fabric softener. Fabric softener was never a guaranteed purchase in careful households, so vinegar quietly filled the gap when laundry still needed to feel right. A small amount added to the rinse cycle softens clothes by breaking down detergent residue that causes stiffness. Pour about half a cup into the fabric softener compartment or add it directly to the final rinse when hand washing. Vinegar also reduces static and helps towels stay absorbent instead of waxy. Despite concerns, it leaves no smell once clothes are fully dry. This works especially well for cotton, denim, towels, and work clothes that get washed often. Vinegar also keeps washing machines cleaner by dissolving mineral buildup inside hoses and drums. For people with sensitive skin, it can reduce irritation caused by leftover soap. Avoid mixing vinegar with bleach in the same load. Distilled white vinegar works best, stores indefinitely, and replaces multiple products without changing your routine. Reusing tea bags. Tea was rarely treated as single-use when supplies needed to last, and routines still mattered. After brewing a first cup, tea bags were often set aside for a second round later in the day. To reuse them safely, place the used bag on a clean dish and let it cool slightly, then steep again with fresh hot water. The second cup will be lighter, but still warming. Black and green teas hold up better than herbal blends. Avoid letting bags sit damp for long periods since mold can form quickly. Beyond drinking, dried tea bags absorb odors in shoes, drawers, and refrigerators. Cooled tea can also be poured onto houseplants or used to loosen grease on dishes. Always reuse tea bags within the same day. This habit stretches comfort, respects resources, and keeps small, daily rituals intact without sacrificing quality or safety. Making candles from wax stubs. Short candles were never considered finished, only paused until enough wax collected to make another. Small stubs were saved in jars or drawers instead of being thrown away. To reuse them, gather the pieces, remove old wick remnants, and melt the wax slowly, using a jar placed in hot water. Never melt wax directly over flame. Once fully melted, pour it into a heat-safe container with a fresh cotton wick anchored at the bottom. Let the candle cool completely before trimming the wick and lighting. Mixing different colors or scents does not affect how it burns. These remade candles work well for power outages, nighttime chores, or backup lighting. Keep wax types separated if possible, since soy and paraffin melt differently. Even small leftovers add up over time, turning scraps into reliable light instead of wasted material. Stretching meat with fillers. Meat portions were rarely allowed to decide how many people could eat at the table. Grandma would stretch meat by using ingenious fillers such as oats, breadcrumbs, cooked rice, beans, or grated vegetables. Ground meat works best for this approach because fillers mix evenly. Dry fillers should be soaked first so they absorb juices instead of drying out the dish. Onions, garlic, and seasoning keep flavor strong even when meat is reduced. These mixtures work well in meatloaf, patties, stews, soups, and casseroles. Fillers also improve texture and help food stay moist longer. 1 pound of meat can feed twice as many people when handled correctly. This method is not about hiding meat, but supporting it. The result is filling familiar meals that satisfy hunger while reducing grocery pressure and making ingredients stretch further across the week. Citrus peels as air fresheners. Fresh-smelling homes did not depend on sprays when citrus peels were already available. Orange, lemon, and grapefruit peels release natural oils that help neutralize odors. To use them, simmer fresh peels gently in water and allow the steam to carry scent through the room. Peels can also be dried on windowsills and placed in bowls, closets, or trash cans. Lightly crushing dried peels refreshes their aroma. Fresh peels rubbed inside sinks or garbage bins help cut lingering smells. Fully dried peels can be burned briefly in stoves or fireplaces for a clean, subtle fragrance. Store dried peels in jars so they are ready when needed. This method freshens living spaces using kitchen scraps, avoids artificial fragrances, and puts materials to use that would otherwise be discarded. Repurposing glass jars for storage. Glass jars quietly became some of the most valuable storage tools in careful households. Empty jars from sauces, jams, or pickles were washed thoroughly, labels soaked off, and lids saved whenever possible. These jars stored dry goods like rice, beans, sugar, nails, screws, and even sewing supplies. Clear glass made it easy to see what was inside without opening anything. Jars also protected contents from moisture, pests, and accidental spills. When lids wore out, cloth and string were often used as covers for non-food storage. Some jars were repurposed again for drinking glasses or measuring containers. Storing leftovers in jars reduced waste and kept food fresh longer. Over time, shelves of mismatched jars replaced expensive storage systems. This habit was about order and longevity. Reusing jars kept homes organized, reduced clutter, and ensured useful containers were always available without spending money. Turning feed sacks into clothes. Did you know that flour sacks were intentionally patterned during the Great Depression so families could turn them into clothing? Companies like Pillsbury and Gold Medal intentionally redesigned packaging to make sacks more appealing for dresses, shirts, and children's clothes. The cotton fabric was strong, washable, and came in consistent sizes. Labels were stamped with water-soluble ink so they could be washed out easily. Resourceful households like Grandma's carefully unstitched seams flattened the fabric and cut patterns efficiently. Feed sack dresses, shirts, aprons, and underwear became common. Some families traded sacks to collect matching prints. This was not novelty. It was necessity met with creativity. Turning feed sacks into clothing allowed families to stay clothed and dignified when fabric was expensive or unavailable, proving how industry adapted when ingenuity became widespread. Potato peel and scrap soup. Soup pots rarely went empty when scraps could still be used. Potato peels, onion skins, carrot ends, celery leaves, and bones were saved throughout the week and stored in the fridge or cool space. When enough scraps accumulated, they were simmered slowly to extract flavor and nutrients. Potato peels added body and starch, thickening broth naturally. Scraps were strained out once softened, leaving a rich base for grains or beans. Nothing fancy was required. Salt, pepper, or herbs were added only if available. This soup stretched meals during lean days and reduced waste significantly. Even small amounts fed multiple people when combined with bread. Scrap soup was not desperation food. It was efficient cooking. It taught careful planning and respect for ingredients. By saving what others discarded, households turned leftovers into nourishment instead of throwing value away. Old toothbrushes used for cleaning. Old toothbrushes earned a second life once they were no longer used for teeth. Their small size and stiff bristles made them perfect for detailed cleaning jobs around the home. Toothbrushes scrubbed grout, stove knobs, hinges, sink drains, and tight corners where rags could not reach. They were especially useful for cleaning tools, shoes, and small machine parts. Some were kept near the sink, others near workbenches. Using an old toothbrush prevented waste and avoided buying specialty brushes. A bit of soap or vinegar made them effective cleaners. Handles could even be bent slightly in hot water to reach awkward angles. This simple reuse saved money and improved cleanliness. Instead of throwing something away because it wore out in one roll, households found a new purpose for it. That mindset kept homes cleaner without adding cost or clutter. Homemade soap and shampoo. Making soap and shampoo at home allowed families to control costs and ingredients. Soap was commonly made by combining rendered animal fat with lye created from wood ash. The mixture was cooked slowly, poured into molds, and cured until firm. This soap cleaned dishes, clothes, and bodies alike. For hair, simple shampoo alternatives included soap shavings diluted in hot water or herbal rinses made from plants like nettle or rosemary. Homemade products lacked perfume but worked reliably. Families adjusted recipes based on skin and hair needs. Containers were reused and refilled endlessly. Making soap was a skill passed down, not a hobby. It ensured cleanliness even when store goods were scarce or unaffordable. Producing these essentials at home reduced dependence on outside supplies and reinforced the habit of self-reliance through simple, repeatable processes. Baking soda for odor control. Odors were handled long before specialty sprays filled store shelves, and baking soda quietly did the work. A small, open dish placed in refrigerators, cupboards, or closets absorbs smells instead of masking them. Sprinkled into shoes, trash cans, or litter boxes, it neutralizes odor at the source. For fabrics, baking soda can be shaken onto carpets or mattresses, left to sit, then brushed or vacuumed away. It also helps remove lingering food smells from cutting boards when rubbed in with a little water. Baking soda works because it balances acidic and alkaline odor compounds. It stores indefinitely, costs very little, and can be reused by drying it out in the sun. Keeping a box on hand meant homes stayed fresh without perfumes or chemicals. This simple powder handled daily problems quietly and reliably, using nothing more than patience and basic know-how. DIY roof repairs with tar. Roof leaks could not always wait for professionals, so tar became a practical solution. Roofing tar was brushed or spread over cracks, seams, and small holes to stop water intrusion fast. For temporary repairs, tar was applied thickly, sometimes reinforced with cloth, burlap, or scrap metal pressed into the sticky surface. This patch sealed leaks long enough to prevent rot and interior damage. Repairs were usually done on dry days, so tar could set properly. Even chimneys and flashing edges were reinforced this way. While not a permanent fix, tar bought time when money or materials were limited. Buckets of tar were stored carefully and reused as needed. This approach protected homes through storms and seasons until proper repairs were possible. Knowing how to apply tar safely and sparingly kept small problems from turning into costly structural damage. Darning and patching clothes. Clothing rarely left the household just because it tore or thinned. Darning socks and patching garments extended their life dramatically. Holes were reinforced with tight stitches that rebuilt fabric strength instead of simply closing gaps. Elbows, knees, and cuffs were patched before they failed completely. Scrap fabric from worn garments became patch material, chosen for durability rather than appearance. Thread was used carefully, and stitches were kept small and strong. Darning also prevented further unraveling, especially in wool and knit items. This practice reduced the need for constant replacements and kept wardrobes functional with minimal expense. Clothes repaired early lasted far longer than those ignored. Over time, patched garments became familiar and reliable. Knowing how to mend was not a hobby skill. It was everyday maintenance that kept people clothed, warm, and prepared without depending on constant purchasing. Reusing coffee grounds. Coffee grounds rarely stopped working after one use. Used grounds were often mixed with fresh ones to brew a second, milder pot, especially when supplies needed stretching. Chicory root was commonly added to extend coffee further while keeping a rich flavor. Roasted grains, dandelion root, or barley were also blended in when coffee was scarce. Beyond brewing, used grounds deodorized refrigerators, scrubbed greasy pans, and enriched compost. Dried grounds helped repel insects in gardens and absorbed odors in shoes. A grandma would always dry the grounds before reuse to prevent mold. Nothing about this practice removed comfort. It simply made a familiar ritual last longer. By treating coffee as a reusable ingredient instead of a single-use luxury, households preserved both routine and resources. Careful reuse kept mornings familiar even when cupboards were thin. Homemade ice packs. Ice packs were easily made without buying specialty products. A sturdy cloth bag or reused bottle filled with ice worked well for swelling or injuries. For longer cold retention, water was mixed with salt before freezing, lowering the freezing point and keeping the pack colder longer. Some people froze damp cloths inside bags so they molded easily to the body. These packs were reused repeatedly and stored in freezers when space allowed. For homes without constant ice access, cold water-soaked cloths served as short-term alternatives. Homemade ice packs were simple, adaptable, and effective. They handled headaches, sprains, fevers, and minor injuries without added cost. When something melted, it was refrozen and used again. This approach relied on common materials and basic understanding rather than purchases, proving that effective care did not require specialized gear. Turning stale bread into meals. Stale bread was never the end of a loaf for most families back in the day. Once bread hardened, it simply changed jobs in the kitchen. Thick slices became French toast, bread pudding, or baked casseroles soaked in milk and eggs. Cubes were toasted into croutons for soups and salads, or simmered directly into broths to thicken them. Ground crumbs turned into breading for fried foods, meatballs, dumplings, and meatloaf. In some kitchens, stale bread was grated and mixed with herbs for stuffing or baked into savory bread cakes. Even simple meals like pan-fried bread with onions or garlic stretched a loaf another day. Bread soup, ribollita, and milk toast were common uses. Nothing fancy was required. Bread still fed people as long as it was handled creatively. This habit kept waste low and ensured filling meals even when fresh baking was not an option. Perpetual soup stock from bones and scraps. A soup pot often stayed warm for days at a time, constantly refreshed instead of emptied. Bones from meals, vegetable peels, onion skins, and herb stems were added to simmering water to create a rolling stock. As soup was eaten, water and new scraps replaced what was removed. This method extracted every bit of nutrition and flavor. Bones released collagen and minerals slowly, improving broth each day. Scraps that might have been discarded instead became nourishment. The pot was kept at a gentle simmer to stay safe and flavorful. Salt was added only when serving. This approach turned leftovers into steady meals with almost no extra cost. Perpetual soup required attention, not money. It rewarded patience and planning, providing warm, filling food day after day while stretching ingredients as far as possible. Saving buttons and zippers. Buttons and zippers were always saved because replacements were not guaranteed. When clothes wore out beyond repair, fasteners were carefully removed and stored in jars, tins, or envelopes. Matching buttons were grouped together, while zippers were sorted by length and color. These small parts became invaluable for future repairs. Missing buttons no longer meant discarding a shirt. Broken zippers could be replaced instead of patched around. Over time, collections grew into personal supply kits. This habit prevented last-minute problems and reduced the need for store trips. It also allowed repairs to be done immediately instead of postponed. Saving fasteners was about readiness. When clothing failed, the solution was already on hand. This simple practice kept wardrobes functional and avoided unnecessary replacement costs, especially when money or access was limited. Old clothes turned into reusable rags. When clothes reached the point where repairs no longer made sense, Grandma would cut them down into rags instead of throwing them away. Shirts became cleaning cloths, towels became floor rags, and worn flannel was saved for polishing or dusting. Fabrics were sorted by use, with softer pieces kept for delicate cleaning and heavier ones reserved for grease or outdoor messes. These rags replaced paper towels entirely. After use, they were washed and reused again and again. This reduced trash and ensured cleaning supplies were always available. Nothing needed to match or look neat. Function mattered more than appearance. Turning clothes into rags gave fabric a second working life and kept homes clean without constant spending. It was a quiet system that rewarded patience and practicality over disposability. Saving and reusing cooking fats. Did you know that saving cooking fat was once standard practice because oils were expensive and not always available? Bacon grease, drippings from roasts, and rendered fat were strained and stored for later use. These fats added flavor to vegetables, fried breads, gravies, and soups. Stored in jars or tins, they kept for long periods when handled properly. Grease was never poured down drains. It was reused for cooking or even soap making. Different fats were saved separately to control flavor. This habit reduced waste and stretched food supply significantly. Fat carries calories and energy, making it valuable during hard times. By saving drippings instead of discarding them, households captured nutrition that would otherwise be lost. It was a simple act that made meals richer and resources last longer without extra expense. For more contents like this, click here to subscribe.